Also how you can find and fix any vacuum leak on your car. Alright, so first things first, a vacuum leak is any amount of unmetered or unmeasured air that enters your engine. As you may know, your MAF sensor, which stands for mass airflow sensor, is the metering sensor that measures the amount of air that enters your engine. And your computer uses the information it receives from this sensor to calculate the exact air-fuel mixture necessary for running your engine under different conditions. So that basically means past this sensor, all your air hoses, your vacuum lines, or your intake manifold gaskets, or any other type of vacuum line needs to be in good shape and airtight. In other words, any air that escapes into the system past this sensor is going to be considered a vacuum leak. And if you have a vacuum leak, that's going to throw off the air-fuel mixture, causing your engine to have performance issues. Now those issues can vary depending on the size and to some degree location of the vacuum leak, as I'm about to show you. So first, let's start with a small vacuum leak. Symptoms of a small vacuum leaks are, generally speaking, either a fluctuating RPM at idle or a high RPM at idle. And if your car has those symptoms, and again I'm generalizing here, but the main culprit is going to be all the different vacuum lines, the small vacuum lines that are coming out of your intake manifold. It's very common for these vacuum lines to get old, dry and brittle, then start developing cracks, and then air leaks through these lines into your engine. Now this car doesn't have any vacuum leaks, but I'm going to create a small one for you so you guys can see the symptoms for yourself. So first I'm going to start the car and then pull a vacuum line so you guys can see the effect it has on the RPM. Now I'm doing this on a warm engine, but as you can see our idle speed is about 750 RPMs. So now on the engine side we're just going to pull one of these vacuum lines to cause a small vacuum leak and see the effect it has on the RPM. And this vacuum line looks as good as any. There we go. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's running a little rough. The RPM was lower. Now your O2 sensors are stabilizing the system, telling there's too much air in the exhaust, therefore your computer is now adding fuel. And now it's smoothing out, and actually in fact now the RPM is low, it's higher than where we started. Alright, so what happened there was that when you have a vacuum leak, the extra air that gets into the system throws off the air-fuel mixture. And when your computer senses that through your O2 sensors, telling it that there's too much air in the exhaust fumes that are coming out of the engine, it puts more gas in there to once again bring that ratio back into balance. And the more gas and more air you have, your engine is going to run faster, therefore you see the rise in RPM. Now I think I need to mention that whenever you're looking for small vacuum leaks like we had here, you're generally going to notice these leaks at when the engine is cold at idle. Because on a warm engine, as you saw, your O2 sensors are going to help your computer to make adjustments to the air-fuel mixture and bring your RPM back to its normal range, which was 750 for this car. So you notice these vacuum leaks when the engine is cold, because when the engine is cold, your computer only goes by the readings from your MAF sensor. Alright, so next let's talk about the symptoms of a large vacuum leak. So a large vacuum leak is usually, again, accompanied by a rough idle or a low idling car, but furthermore, you might have a hard time starting your car, or if the leak is in the right place and it's big enough, you may not be able to start your car at all. But besides that, you're also going to have a hard time to get your car going from a dead stop. You might feel it hesitating or bogging down as you're trying to get going from a dead stop. All those are symptoms of a rather large vacuum leak. And if you suspect a large vacuum leak or have those symptoms, I would start off by checking this air hose. This air hose, just like the vacuum lines, gets old, dry and brittle and starts breaking apart. And I've seen it break apart right in between these areas where it's very hard to see, or other times underneath it where it's easy to miss. Now the other culprit for a vacuum leak with those symptoms is your intake manifold gaskets, either upper or lower intake manifold gaskets if your car has them. Now in a minute I'll show you how you can exactly find all these different vacuum leaks, but for now let's cause a large vacuum leak on this car and see how it goes. And for a large vacuum leak, I've already loosened this clamp, so I'm just going to pull this air hose out and simulate the condition of a large vacuum leak. Whoa. See how rough our engine is running? It's almost going to die if I pull it out further. And this large of a leak, Doesn't matter, your O2 sensor tell your computer it's too much air in the system, it just can't compensate for that. You can also hear the hiss of the leak too. And if I pull this completely out, I can even kill the engine too. Alright, up next, let me show you what are some things that a do-it-yourselfer can do in order to pinpoint a vacuum leak. Alright, one way to find a vacuum leak is to use some propane. And the way this works is you open the regulator, allowing propane to come out of the tank, and then without lighting your propane torch, obviously, you start going around all the areas or the suspected areas that you could have a vacuum leak. You start after your MAP sensor, you can go around this main air hose, then go to your throttle body gasket, all the vacuum lines around your intake manifold and throttle body, and then around your intake manifold gaskets. And you want to be slow and methodical with this and cover all your bases. Again, all the vacuum lines. Also, don't forget around your fuel injectors if you can reach them. And whatever area you notice a difference in the RPM, that's where your vacuum leak is. And that's because, as you may know, propane is combustible, and when it leaks to your engine through your vacuum leak, it's going to affect your RPM and you're going to notice it. Now, this may seem dangerous to some people, but this is actually safer than the next method I'm about to show you, which is to use starting fluid to find a vacuum leak. And the danger in using these is that, let's say you have a arc from one of your spark plug wires or your ignition coils, and you get this near that arc, and that arc or spark causes a fire. If it's propane, you know, it's just going to be just one maybe ball of fire. If your face is really close to it, you might lose your eyebrows and stuff, but if it's starting fluid, then it's a liquid, it's going to catch on fire, and you might catch your engine on fire, and then things can get out of hand. But regardless of what method you use, make sure you have one of these and or a garden hose nearby. And like I said, the next method is to use starting fluid instead of propane. But when you use starting fluid, make sure you use this on a cold engine. Because not only sparks can catch this on fire, but also the heat from your exhaust manifold if the car is already warm. And you spray this in one area, soak whatever component you suspect has the leak, wait a little bit, wait a few seconds. If there's no changes to the RPM, then you move on to the next component or next vacuum hose or whatever. Now, there are a couple of components that could cause a vacuum leak that starting fluid or propane can pinpoint. And those are your brake booster, your PCV valve, and your EGR valve. If your brake booster develops a leak, you know, no matter how much propane or starting fluid you spray around it, you're not gonna notice a difference because it's inside that component and you can't get that stuff inside your brake booster. Alright, so here's a look at our brake booster, and here's the vacuum line that goes from our intake manifold to our brake booster. Now, this line, if you spray starting fluid around it or propane, get propane close to it. If it has a crack, then you'll notice a difference. But if the brake booster itself has a leak inside, then you won't know. But the way you can determine whether this is a problem or not is after you test this vacuum hose that goes from your intake manifold to it, use a pair of locking pliers and pinch this vacuum hose and take your brake booster out of the system. If your RPM goes back to normal or your engine starts running better, then you know there's a leak inside the brake booster. And it's very much the same thing for your PCV valve. If the valve is stuck open, it's going to cause a vacuum leak at idle. And propane nor starting fluid is going to tell you whether that valve is stuck open or not, but the way you can find that out is after you test this vacuum hose, you do the same thing. You use a pair of pliers, you pinch this hose. If your RPM improves, then more than likely that valve is stuck open, causing your vacuum leak. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about the PCV valve and how that works, I recently made a video showing you how you can exactly test it and how the PCV valve and system work, and I'll put a link to that video right here on this side of the screen where you can click on it. And it's very much the same thing for your EGR valve. If this valve gets stuck open due to either carbon buildup or it simply fails in that position, then you're going to have a vacuum leak here. Now, diagnosing problems with your EGR valve or EGR system as a whole is a little bit more complicated. But again, fear not, I have another video on that one as well, and I'll put a link to that one on this side of the screen too. But both the EGR valve and the PCV valve generally fail in the closed position. Now, sometimes, again, they fail in the open position, causing you to have a vacuum leak. And if you suspect a vacuum leak and you have done everything else and you can't find it, then I would recommend you go to those two valves and check them for vacuum leaks. And that's all there is to it, folks. That's my version of how to find a vacuum leak on your car. And if you find anything useful in this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more like it. And also consider checking out some of my other videos. I'll put them up on the screen as video links so you can just click on it. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time.